Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of just like absolute clinical precision.
Right, like engineering.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like you fall off a bike, you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the black film, and the doctor just points and says, there it is. That's the problem.
It's binary. Broken or not broken.
Yeah, it's clean. And honestly, it's comforting. We desperately like things to be visible, right? To be categorized. We want a clear enemy.
We want a neat, linear narrative of cause and effect. A plus B equals C. I mean, it gives us a sense of control over a totally unpredictable world.
But then you step into the world of human behavior, the world of long-term success and catastrophic failure, and suddenly that beautiful, clear x-ray machine is just it's completely useless.
Oh, completely. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky.
Right. And we always want to point to a single explosive event that ruined a life, like the bankruptcy, the divorce, the public meltdown. Or on the flip side, we want to see the single massive stroke of genius that made someone a millionaire, the grand epiphany.
Right, the overnight success.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the X-ray of a human life doesn't show a clean break. If you look closely, it just shows a million tiny, almost invisible fractures compounding over time, or a million microscopic reinforcements building an unbreakable bone.
Which completely defies our biological desire for instant clarity, and immediate resolution. I mean, we are just not wired to perceive microscopic changes over long time horizons.
We really aren't.
No, we're wired to notice the tiger jumping out of the bushes today, not the cholesterol building in our arteries over 2 decades.
And that biological blind spot is exactly the trap we are dismantling today. So if you are listening to this right now and you are just exhausted by the microwave mentality our society is absolutely obsessed with.
Instant gratification industrial complex, yeah.
Yeah, you know the pitch. Make $200,000 in passive income while working 2 hours a week from a beach. Or lose 30 pounds in 14 days with zero exercise. Slap on this magical cream and look 20 years younger by tomorrow morning.
Right, it preys on that exact evolutionary flaw we just mentioned. It sells the illusion of the grand overnight event.
It's everywhere, and it is a fundamental lie. So the promise of our deep dive today is to shatter that illusion entirely. We're pulling from an incredibly comprehensive breakdown of Darren Hardy's book, The Compound Effect, via a really fantastic deep dive summary from Growth Listen.
That's a brilliant breakdown.
It really is. We're going to map out the unsexy, often profoundly boring, but mathematically guaranteed path to outperforming 99% of the population. It's about swapping the lottery ticket mentality for the operator's manual to your own psychology.
And it is arguably the most important shift a person can make. I mean, we are moving away from the hype of motivation and moving into the cold, unshakable architecture of momentum and mathematics.
Let's unpack the core mechanism of this right out of the gate with a thought experiment from the source material. It's called the magic penny, and it perfectly encapsulates what we're up against here.
Oh, this is the perfect starting point.
Yeah, so I want you, the listener, to imagine I am standing in your living room holding a metal briefcase. I pop the latches, open it up, and it is stuffed with $3 million in cold, hard, tax-free cash. It is yours. That is option A.
Okay.
Option B is I hand you a single shiny copper penny. But this penny possesses a unique property. It magically doubles in value every single day for 31 days. Which do you take?
It's the ultimate stress test, really, of human psychology colliding with exponential mathematics. And intuitively, almost every single person grabs the briefcase with the $3 million.
Of course they do. I mean, $3 million pays off the mortgage today, it buys the cars today, it quits the job today. There is zero waiting, zero friction, and zero risk. You take the briefcase, and your life changes before dinner.
But by taking the briefcase, you are falling victim to a cognitive bias known as hyperbolic discounting.
Hyperbolic discounting.
Exactly. Our brains are hardwired to heavily devalue a reward the further away it is in time. We prefer a smaller, immediate payoff to a massive, delayed payoff because, well, evolutionarily speaking, tomorrow was never guaranteed.
Right.
But if you conquer that primal urge and take the penny, you are harnessing the compound effect. And the math behind it is staggering, yet incredibly deceptive in the beginning.
Let's trace that deception, actually, because the early stages look like a colossal mistake. You take the penny. Day 2, You have 2 cents. Day 3, 4 cents. By day 10, you were looking at your friend who took the $3 million. They are probably posting pictures from a yacht in Monaco, and you were staring at like $512.
Yeah, you are experiencing massive social friction at this point. Your brain is just screaming that you made the wrong choice. And the compounding curve doesn't offer relief quickly either.
Not at all.
By day 20, 2/3 of the way through the timeline, you only have 11 days left, and your magical penny has grown to just over $5,200. Your friend has bought a mansion, and you are starting to panic. You are enduring the invisible phase of compounding.
The invisible phase.
Yes, you are putting in the time, waiting, watching, and wondering if this invisible math is actually a scam.
But the architecture of exponential growth is it's quietly building its base.
Yeah.
Because on day 29, you finally cross a major threshold. You hit $2.7 million. You are finally in the same financial universe as your friend.
Right.
But it's day 30 where the dam breaks.
Yeah.
You jump to 5.3 million. And on that final day, day 31, that single insignificant penny explodes into $10,737,418.24. You don't just catch your friend, you lap them 3 times over.
And this mathematical reality perfectly mirrors human endeavor. We abandon our goals because the early stages of compound growth are utterly invisible. I mean, when you start eating whole foods and going to the gym, you don't drop 30 pounds by Friday.
Obviously not.
When you start investing $500 a month, your portfolio doesn't look like Warren Buffett's in a year. Because the results are delayed and the effort is immediate, people experience a crisis of faith.
They just give up.
They declare, this isn't working, and they walk away. They quit on day 20, holding their $5,000, completely unaware that the explosion of day 31 was mathematically guaranteed if they had just stayed the course.
Wow. So if the math of compounding is this universally powerful, and if it operates like a law of physics, why do so few people actually ride the curve to day 31?
Well, the source material argues it isn't about grand gestures or heroic willpower at all. It all comes down to the microscopic, seemingly irrelevant choices we make on a Tuesday morning.
The text illustrates this with a parable about 3 childhood friends, right? Larry, Scott, and Brad.
Yes. To set the baseline, these 3 men are identical in their circumstances. They grew up in the same neighborhood, they all make roughly $50,000 a year, they were all happily married, and they share the exact same average health, maybe carrying a little bit of a sluggish post-marriage rut. They are standing shoulder to shoulder at the starting line.
Okay, so Larry is our control group. He decides the status quo is fine, he doesn't make any massive mistakes, but he doesn't initiate any improvements either. He just keeps floating along, though he harbors this quiet, low-level resentment, wondering why his life never really gets any better.
Right, he's just treading water.
Then we have Scott. Scott decides to introduce a few incredibly small, almost laughable positive changes into his routine. He starts reading 10 pages of a nonfiction book every day. He swaps the morning radio for 30 minutes of an educational podcast on his commute. And physically, he cuts exactly 125 calories from his daily intake.
Which, in the grand scheme of human diet, is a rounding error. I mean, 125 calories is skipping a single glass of juice, or swapping the mayonnaise on a sandwich for mustard.
Right.
He also adds a short, brisk walk to his day to burn perhaps another 50 calories. There is no grueling CrossFit membership, no severe fasting, no dramatic lifestyle overhaul.
Those tiny tweaks.
Exactly.
Then there's Brad. Brad takes the opposite trajectory, but his changes are equally minuscule. He buys a massive new television to enhance his downtime. He starts experimenting with recipes from a cooking channel, mostly creamy comfort food casseroles and rich baked goods. And he installs a little home bar, adding just 1 extra alcoholic drink a week to his routine.
Again, nothing destructive, just a slight pivot toward comfort.
Yeah.
So the timeline is where the illusion of the X-ray comes back. Month 5 rolls around. If you take a snapshot of Larry, Scott, and Brad, what do you see?
Absolutely nothing. They weigh the same, their marriages look the same, their careers are identical.
Even at month 10, the divergence is undetectable. Larry is floating, Scott is reading, Brad is baking. By month 18, a year and a half into this experiment, you might notice a slight difference in their energy levels if you looked really closely. But on paper, they are still peers.
But then we hit month 25.
Right? The compounding curve is starting to steepen. Scott is noticeably leaner, his posture is better, he speaks with more authority. Brad is visibly carrying extra weight, his skin looks tired, and he seems perpetually stressed.
And by month 31, That exact magic number from our penny story. The results are staggering, and the math is undeniable. Over 31 months, Brad has gained 33.5 pounds. Scott has lost 33.5 pounds.
That is a 67-pound physical swing between two men who merely shifted their habits by a handful of calories.
It's crazy if you look at the raw numbers. 125 calories saved or added per day times 940 days equals 117,500 calories. Divide that by 3,500 calories per pound, and it equals exactly 33.5 pounds. The universe kept the ledger perfectly balanced.
But the physical weight is merely the visible symptom. It's just the tip of the iceberg. The profound compound effect happened in their psychological and external realities.
How so?
Well, over those 940 days, Scott read nearly 1,000 hours of books and audio. He synthesized that knowledge, applied a new strategy at his job, secured a promotion, and significantly increased his income. His newfound confidence and energy bled into his marriage, which is now thriving. Brad, conversely, is sluggish and miserable at work. His performance has flatlined, and his marriage is actively falling apart.
Okay, I have to stop here and push back on this because the author uses this story to introduce the concept of elephants versus mosquitoes. Yeah. The premise is that human beings are rarely ruined by massive catastrophic mistakes. The elephants. We don't usually wake up and decide to destroy our lives. Instead, we are derailed by tiny, invisible, unconscious daily choices. The mosquitoes.
Yes.
But looking at Brad's outcome, it feels incredibly melodramatic. I mean, he baked a muffin, bought a TV, and had a beer. How on earth does baking a pastry lead to a struggling marriage and a failing career? It sounds like a paranoid version of the butterfly effect.
It sounds absurd if you view the muffin and the divorce as a direct A to B sequence, but you have to view it through the lens of psychological causality and habituation. The source text breaks this down as the battle between simple disciplines versus simple errors in judgment. It is never about the muffin itself, it is about the behavioral cascade and muffin triggers.
Okay, let's trace that cascade because I really need to see the mechanism here. Walk me from the kitchen to the divorce lawyer.
All right, let's look at the biology and the psychology. Brad starts baking and eating these heavy, high glycemic index comfort foods late in the evening while watching his new TV. The heavy food disrupts his deep REM sleep. He isn't getting a restorative rest. He wakes up groggy. His cortisol levels are slightly elevated, and his baseline energy is depleted. Because he is tired, his patience at work is thin. He snaps at a coworker, or he half-asses a presentation. His boss notices the dip in performance and makes a critical comment. Now Brad feels unappreciated and defensive. His stress spikes.
And when stress spikes, the brain seeks immediate dopamine to soothe the discomfort.
Precisely the mechanism. The drive home feels unbearable, so to cope with the stress, he stops for fast food or pours that extra stronger drink from his new home bar when he walks in the door. Now, because he is physically heavy from the food and mentally exhausted from the stress, he decides to skip the evening walk he used to take with his wife.
And the walks were their primary point of connection.
Yes. The walks stop. Without that unstructured time to talk and decompress, they lose their daily emotional tether. Furthermore, Brad isn't getting the endorphin boost from the exercise and the fresh air. His self-esteem takes a hit as his clothes stop fitting. Because he is unhappy with himself, he stops complimenting his wife. He withdraws emotionally and retreats to the big screen TV to numb out. His wife starts to feel invisible and lonely. She brings it up, perhaps out of frustration, which Brad's stressed brain interprets as nagging. He builds a wall.
And then the gap just widens.
He seeks validation and connection elsewhere, maybe pouring all her energy into her career or her friends, essentially living a separate life under the same roof. A chasm opens up, all of it stemming from a cascading, compounding series of unconscious choices that started with prioritizing a momentary culinary comfort over long-term vitality.
That is terrifyingly plausible. It's the sleepwalking that kills us. The X-ray doesn't show a massive screaming match that ended the marriage. It shows 1,000 missed evening walks. It shows 1,000 moments of choosing the TV over conversation.
And the most sobering reality is that the compound effect is always operating. It is a universal law. It doesn't care if you are aware of it or not. You are either compounding positive momentum or you are compounding negative friction. There is no neutral gear in human behavior. The results are guaranteed. We just ignore them because we are conditioned to look for the flashy, instantaneous transformation.
Which transitions us into the hardest psychological hurdle of this entire framework. If we want to stop sleepwalking and actually harness this math, we have to fundamentally destroy how we view our own agency. We have to violently eradicate the concepts of blame, victimhood, and this pervasive, comforting myth of being unlucky. The text calls this adopting the 100% rule.
And this is why the philosophy becomes incredibly abrasive for a lot of people. It requires an ego death.
It really does. The author recounts attending an executive seminar when he was 18 years old. The instructor poses a question to the room. What percentage of responsibility do you personally bear in making a relationship work? And people throw out the standard answers. 50-50, it's a partnership. Or maybe 60-40 if you have to compromise.
Sure, standard responses.
But the instructor walks to the whiteboard and writes 100 in massive letters. He says a relationship only works if you take 100% responsibility for making it work, with zero expectation of receiving anything in return.
It is a radical departure from the transactional way we usually view human interaction. I mean, if you leave it to 50-50, you are inherently leaving half of your success to chance or to the whims of another flawed human being.
He applies this framework to every facet of life, literally calling it graduating from the University of Hard Knocks. But the sources shared a story that I genuinely struggle with. The author lost $330,000 in a joint venture. His business partner completely mismanaged the finances, essentially blew the money and ruined the project. Yet the author claims that this loss was 100% his own fault.
He took total ownership of the disaster.
But this is where I have to throw a flag on the play. I mean, if someone actively mismanages your funds or outright embezzles from you, how is that your fault? If I am sitting at a red light obeying the law and a drunk driver rear-ends my car, that is not my fault. Claiming 100% responsibility for the actions of bad actors feels like toxic self-flagellation. It feels like we are letting the guilty party off the hook entirely.
That is the most common and entirely rational pushback to this philosophy. It sounds like victim blaming, but we have to separate legal culpability from psychological utility. The concept of internal versus external locus of control is critical here. It is not about absolving the business partner of their legal guilt or their moral failing. It is about where you choose to house your own power.
How does taking the blame for a thief give me power?
Let's play out the two scenarios. Scenario A, you adopt an external locus of control. You blame the partner. You say, he is a crook, he ruined my business, I am a victim of his greed. While technically true, what happens next?
You stay mad.
You remain angry, you remain stagnant, and fundamentally you learn nothing about how to prevent it from happening again because in your mind, the variables were outside your control. You hand over your agency.
You essentially declare yourself a passenger in your own life.
Yes. Now, scenario B, you adopt an internal locus of control. You take 100% responsibility. You look in the mirror and say, I chose to go into business with him. I chose not to run a deeper background check. I chose to ignore my gut feeling when the first financial report was late. I chose not to set up dual signature bank accounts.
Okay.
By owning the micro failures that led to the catastrophe, you suddenly own the power to change them. You build better gates, you create stricter protocols. You move from being a helpless victim of circumstance to being the ultimate architect of your reality. Taking responsibility isn't about guilt, it is about weaponizing your failures to guarantee your future safety.
That is a massive paradigm shift. You can't control the tornado, but you are 100% responsible for whether or not you built a storm shelter. And the text provides a beautiful, much softer example of this internal locus of control working in a marriage. It's an exercise called Thanksgiving year-round.
Oh, this is a phenomenal application of applied psychology altering external reality.
So, a friend of the author was trapped in a bitter, resentful loop, constantly complaining about his wife and blaming her for the friction in their home. The author challenged him to adopt the 100% rule and try an experiment. He told him to keep a secret Thanksgiving journal. For an entire year, every single day, he had to find and write down at least one specific thing he appreciated about his wife.
Even small things.
Exactly. It could be monumental, or it could be the way she styled her hair, a meal she prepared, or how she interacted with their dogs. Just 5 minutes of intentional, documented gratitude.
And the mechanism of change here is fascinating because he eventually gifted her this journal at the end of the year. She was deeply moved, of course. But the profound transformation did not happen within the wife. The person who was entirely rewired by this exercise was the husband.
Because he weaponized his own attention. By forcing his brain to actively scan his environment for positive traits every single day, his entire perceptual filter shifted. He stopped hyperfixating on her flaws because his brain was tasked with a new mission. His underlying attitude became softer, more patient, and kinder.
Right.
And naturally, because human beings are highly attuned to microexpressions and energy, she subconsciously felt this lack of judgment and responded with more warmth and affection. He changed his internal filter, which altered his behavior, which in turn transformed her behavior. He took 100% responsibility for the emotional climate of the relationship.
He essentially programmed his reticular activating system. That's the bundle of nerves in the brainstem that filters incoming information. If you buy a red car, you suddenly see red cars everywhere. If you tell your brain to look for reasons to love your spouse, you will see a loving spouse.
It's credible.
And this exact neurological mechanism applies to how we experience luck. The author argues adamantly that luck is not a random distribution of cosmic favor. Luck is engineered.
The formula for luck. I love this breakdown. It's preparation plus attitude plus opportunity plus action equals luck. He references a brilliant insight from Richard Branson, who essentially says that luck surrounds every single one of us constantly. If you live in a free society, you are walking through a blizzard of opportunities every day. The variable is not the presence of luck. The variable is your capacity to capture it.
Right, because opportunity rarely announces itself with a megaphone. It whispers. It disguises itself as a casual conversation, a frustrating problem that needs solving, or a tangential idea in a book.
Yeah.
If your attitude, your reticular activating system, is tuned to a frequency of victimhood and pessimism, your brain will literally filter out the opportunity. You won't even see it. But if you have prepared your skills, maintained an attitude of abundance, spotted the subtle opening, and executed with massive action, well, the world will look at your success and dismissively call you lucky.
So, assuming we have swallowed our pride, accepted total responsibility for our lives, and committed to engineering our own luck, how do we actually execute? How do we gain control over those invisible mosquito choices? How do we stop the sleepwalking that ruined Brad's life?
You have to force the unconscious into the conscious mind. You bring the mosquitoes into the harsh light of day, and the primary tool for that is meticulous tracking.
Tracking. This is the unsexy secret weapon. The author shares a deeply humbling story from his 20s. He was a hotshot, making fantastic money in real estate. He feels rich. But he sits down with his accountant, and the accountant drops a devastating reality check. You owe over $100,000 in taxes. Yeah, and the author realizes with creeping horror that he doesn't have the cash. He had literally no idea where his wealth had evaporated to. It had just bled out through 1,000 tiny cuts.
A remarkably common phenomenon even among high earners. It's Parkinson's law of money. Expenses always rise to meet income unless consciously restricted.
So the accountant tells him, you are digging your financial grave with your own wallet. And he forces the author to implement a draconian measure. He must carry a small physical pocket notebook and manually write down every single cent he spends for 30 straight days. If he buys a $1,000 suit, he writes it down. If he spends 50 cents on air for his tires at the gas station, he writes it down. No exceptions.
And this seemingly tedious exercise creates what behavioral psychologists call a cognitive pause.
I picture this like turning on the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights in a dark, incredibly messy room. When the lights were off, the room felt fine. You were just navigating by memory, bumping your shins on the coffee table, occasionally stepping on a stray Lego. It was painful, but you ignored it. But the moment you flip on those massive industrial lights, the moment you start the notebook, you can no longer deny the reality of the mess. You see the dirty dishes, you see the mold in the corner, you see exactly where you were stepping.
That is a brilliant visualization. The fluorescent light doesn't clean the room, it eliminates your ability to feign ignorance. If we look at the neurology of why tracking is so potent, we have to understand that human brains are fundamentally lazy.
Right.
They run primarily on the basal ganglia, the brain's autopilot center, executing automatic habit, loops, cue, routine, reward to conserve mental energy. Swiping a credit card is an automatic loop, but when you force yourself to pull out a physical notebook, uncap a pen, and write down a purchase, you are introducing massive behavioral friction.
You're waking yourself up.
Exactly. You are violently disrupting the basal ganglia's routine and forcing the prefrontal cortex, the logical, analytical part of your brain, to wake up and engage. That physical act buys you a critical split second to ask, do I actually value this purchase, or am I just operating on reflex?
The author even admits that he frequently put items back on the shelf simply because he didn't want the sheer humiliation of writing another dumb purchase down in his own notebook. The friction saved him. And this isn't just a strategy for fixing the mistakes of millionaires. The text shares the story of Kathleen, which perfectly illustrates the compounding power of the money tree.
Oh, Kathleen's journey is the ultimate testament to the exponential power of microscopic corrections.
Right, so Kathleen was an administrative assistant, earning $40,000 a year. The author challenged her to save 10% of her income. She flatly refused, saying it was mathematically impossible. She was tapped out. Rent, groceries, car payments, there was nothing left at the end of the month. So he backed off the 10% and just asked her to do the notebook exercise. Track every penny for 30 days, and then try to find just 1% to save. $33 a month.
That threshold's so low, it bypasses the brain's defense mechanisms against deprivation.
Exactly. She tracked her spending and realized she was buying lunch every day. By simply bringing a sandwich from home just one day a week, she hit her $33. Then the lights were on, and she got curious. The next month, she dug deeper and found 2% by downgrading her premium cable package. Then she canceled a magazine subscription she never read. Then she stopped buying a $3 coffee twice a week and just drank the free coffee in the break room. And the fascinating part is that this didn't feel like a punishment to her. It awakened a competitive, creative energy.
Tracking fundamentally shifted her identity from a passive consumer to an active optimizer.
She got so good at finding systemic waste in her own life that she proposed a deal to the author, her boss. She said, "If I find ways to eliminate waste and save this company money, will you pay me 10% of the savings? And if I generate new revenue ideas, would you give me 15% of the profits?"
Bold move.
He agreed. Within 2 years, this assistant who was struggling on 40 grand was pulling in over $100,000 a year. She eventually leveraged that momentum to launch her own consulting firm. Years later, the author ran into her at an airport. She was earning over $250,000 a year and had amassed over $1 million in liquid assets. Her entire financial empire was built on the foundation of tracking $33.
It is the compound effect manifesting in its purest form. And speaking of those small financial leaks Kathleen plugged, the text highlights a specific example that usually makes people physically wince. The true compounded cost of a daily $4 coffee.
Oh, the coffee math is brutal. It feels like a personal attack.
It does, because we engage in hyperbolic discounting with small purchases. $4 a day feels like a mosquito. It feels entirely harmless. But $4 a day is $1,460 a year. Now, apply the concept of opportunity cost. If you took that same money, skipped the coffee, and invested it with an average compounding market return over 20 years, that daily caffeine habit equates to over $51,000. You are quite literally drinking a luxury vehicle over the course of 2 decades.
When you apply the cognitive pause and force your prefrontal cortex to ask, is this latte worth $51,000 of my future financial freedom? The urge to swipe the card vanishes. But here's the massive wall we inevitably hit. The fluorescent lights of tracking expose the mess. You see the coffee drain, you see the muffin habit, you see the 3 hours of nightly scrolling. But knowing the enemy is there and actually possessing the capacity to destroy it are two wildly different things. Illumination does not equal elimination.
No, it does not. Awareness is merely the prerequisite. Uprooting a deeply ingrained habit requires a totally different psychological engine. This brings us to the fundamental inadequacy of willpower and the absolute necessity of what the author terms why power.
The source material uses a brilliant botanical visual here, the oak tree versus the sapling. Habits are incredibly easy to manage when they're just little green saplings. You can pluck a new bad habit out of the soil with 2 fingers. But if you let that behavior repeat for 5, 10, or 20 years, it grows into a massive oak tree with roots that wrap around your very identity. You cannot just casually yank an oak tree out of the ground.
And yet, that is exactly what most people attempt to do every January 1st. They try to rely on sheer white-knuckled willpower to uproot an oak tree. The author argues that relying on willpower to break a deep neurological loop is like trying to protect a picnic basket from a starving, aggressive grizzly bear by gently tossing a paper napkin over it.
The bear doesn't even register the napkin. He eats the basket, the napkin, and probably your arm. Willpower is a biological joke in the face of deep habituation. We know from the concept of ego depletion that willpower is a highly finite, exhaustible resource. You burn through it all day long, navigating rush hour traffic, suppressing the urge to yell at a difficult client, forcing yourself to focus on a boring spreadsheet. By 8 o'clock at night, your willpower reserves are completely drained. and the grizzly bear easily consumes the entire pint of ice cream.
Precisely. Willpower is a battery, and it drains quickly. What you require is an inexhaustible intrinsic power source. You need why power.
Let's use the plank analogy for the text to illustrate this because it perfectly captures how motivation alters capability. If I lay a 10-inch wide wooden plank on the ground in your backyard and I offer you $20 to walk from one end to the other, you do it instantly. The risk is zero. The reward is adequate. It's easy money. But if I take that exact same wooden plank and I suspend it between the rooftops of two 100-story skyscrapers and the wind is howling,
I am absolutely not stepping onto that plank for $20. The risk-reward ratio is utterly broken. My survival instinct vetoes the action immediately.
exactly. The action is impossible. But what if you look across the chasm and your child is standing on the opposite rooftop and that building is engulfed in flames?
The hesitation vanishes. I would sprint across that plank without a second thought.
Notice what happened there. The physical dimensions of the plank did not change. The terrifying 100-story drop did not change. The lethal danger did not change. The only variable that shifted was the why. When the reason is deeply emotional, profound, and non-negotiable, the how becomes almost irrelevant. You need a reason that bypasses the logical brain and stirs your soul, providing infinite thrust so you never have to rely on the flimsy paper napkin of willpower ever again.
But the text ventures into some fascinating and slightly controversial psychological territory regarding how we actually source that initial thrust. Your why does not necessarily have to be pure, noble, or deeply spiritual to be highly effective.
Yes, I wanted to debate this with you. We are constantly fed this narrative by the self-help industry that we need to find our higher purpose, that we need to be bathed in positivity and light. But he also shatters that. He says it is perfectly acceptable and sometimes preferable to use an enemy, a bitter grudge, or sheer spite as your initial fuel. He points to Pete Carroll, the legendary football coach, who openly used the deep frustration of being small, unathletic, and constantly overlooked as a kid to fuel his manic drive to prove everyone wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
And look at Anthony Hopkins. He suffered from undiagnosed dyslexia and ADHD, was labeled a stupid, problematic child by the school system, and he actively weaponized his simmering anger and resentment at society to drive his work ethic, eventually becoming one of the greatest actors of our generation. So my question to you, as an expert in human behavior, is it actually healthy to use an enemy or a grudge as your fuel source? Doesn't that just breed cortisol and long-term toxicity?
It is a critical distinction to make, and it requires us to separate the ignition switch from the sustainable engine. If we examine the neurobiology of motivation, long-term sustained fulfillment absolutely must be tethered to deep, positive core values. If you run your life purely on the toxic fuel of spite for 4 decades, you will likely end up highly successful but physically and emotionally ravaged. Your cortisol levels will destroy you. Success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure.
So the positivity crowd is right in the long term.
In the long term, yes. However, when you are trying to break the massive gravitational inertia of a 20-year-old bad habit, when you're trying to uproot that oak tree gentle positivity often lacks the necessary voltage. Think of a space shuttle launch. The shuttle uses massive solid rocket boosters filled with an incredibly volatile, dirty fuel to violently rip the ship free from Earth's gravity. Once the shuttle reaches orbit and the friction is gone, it detaches those boosters and lets them fall away, relying on clean, sustainable propulsion to navigate the stars. Spite, anger, the desire to humiliate your doubters, these are your solid rocket boosters. They provide raw, explosive energy to snap you out of complacency. The mastery lies in knowing when you have reached orbit and consciously shifting your fuel source to your core values before the spite burns up the ship.
I absolutely love that framing. Weaponize the spite to break gravity. Use the core values to navigate the stars. And once we have that immense why power harnessed, the text provides a very tactical, boots-on-the-ground toolkit for the actual mechanics of behavior change. It outlines 5 strategies to dismantle bad habits and 6 to construct new ones. Let's weave through these not as a sterile list, but as a methodology for removing environmental friction. If willpower is dead, how do we clear the brush?
We start by recognizing that habits are triggered by context. The first step of elimination is mapping the triggers, the big 4: who, what, where, and when.
You have to become a detective in your own life. Who are you standing next to when you suddenly feel the urge to gossip or complain? What specific time of day does the sugar craving hit? Are you stressed, bored, or tired? You can't dismantle a bomb if you don't know how it's wired.
Once the wiring is exposed, you must violently alter the environment. You clean house.
If you are trying to quit eating junk food, you do not leave a bag of Doritos on the kitchen counter and practice staring at it to build discipline. That is a fool's errand. You throw every single piece of junk food into the garbage can outside. You make the bad behavior physically impossible, or at least highly inconvenient.
You are engineering your environment so that failing requires more effort than succeeding. But you cannot simply leave a behavioral vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. You must swap the habit.
This is a crucial pivot. You don't have to suffer white-knuckle deprivation. The author admits he loves the dopamine hit of eating ice cream after dinner. Instead of relying on willpower to eat nothing, he swapped a massive high-calorie sundae for just 2 small Hershey's Kisses. He got the neurological reward, the hit of sweetness, but drastically reduced the caloric damage. His sister-in-law realized her late-night snacking wasn't about hunger. She just craved the audible crunch of tortilla chips to release stress while watching TV. So she swapped the chips for raw celery and carrots. Find the underlying psychological reward, sweetness, crunch, distraction, and aggressively swap the delivery mechanism.
And how you approach the transition matters. Some habits require you to ease in to prevent the nervous system from rebelling.
If you drink a pot of coffee a day, quitting cold turkey will give you migraines that will absolutely break your resolve. You transition to half calf, then full decaf, then green tea. You slide down the ramp.
But contrast that easing with situations that demand a radical break. Jump in.
The vice check. Sometimes a slow ramp just prolongs the agony. The author mentions a colleague who was a heavy daily drinker. He attended a wedding, saw an older gentleman who was vibrant, sharp, and healthy, realized his own drinking was aging him rapidly, and he just quit alcohol on the spot. Some deep-rooted oaks require dynamite. In fact, the author routinely implements a 30-day vice fast every few months. He will abruptly give up coffee or wine or a favorite television show for no other reason than to prove to his own brain that he is still the alpha dog, that the habit does not own him.
It is a profound exercise in reasserting sovereignty over your basal ganglia. Now, assuming we have cleared the toxic brush, we have to plant the new saplings. And the architecture of building good habits is essentially the inverse of breaking bad ones. You begin by setting yourself up to succeed.
Make the positive choice the path of least resistance. If you decide you are going to work out, but your gym is a 30-minute drive in the opposite direction of your commute, you will absolutely find an excuse not to go. But if the gym is directly on your route home and your gym bag is already sitting in the passenger seat, the friction of skipping the gym becomes higher than the friction of going.
You are manipulating laziness to work in your favor. And cognitively, you must reframe the narrative. You think addition, not subtraction.
This is a massive linguistic and psychological shift. Instead of groaning, "I can't have a double cheeseburger tonight, I'm on a diet," which reinforces a mindset of scarcity and deprivation, you say, "I get to fuel my body with this incredible fresh steak salad, and I'm going to feel powerful and light tomorrow." You focus entirely on the abundance and the benefits of the new addition, rendering the old habit irrelevant.
To lock this new identity in place, you leverage the immense power of social pressure. You go public.
We are tribal animals. We are terrified of losing status. Use that fear. Tell your entire office you are quitting smoking. Put a massive, highly visible calendar on your cubicle wall and draw a thick red X for every day you stay clean. Let the fear of public hypocrisy be the guardrail that keeps you on track when your internal motivation wavers.
And you distill that public pressure into focused partnerships. You find a success buddy.
An accountability partner. The author maintains a strict, non-negotiable 30-minute phone call every single Friday with a peak performance partner. They ruthlessly audit each other's week, share the wins, and call out the losses. You need someone who is invested in your growth and unafraid to tell you when you are lying to yourself.
You can further weaponize these relationships through structured competition.
There is a reason corporate step tracking challenges work so well. An accountant who hasn't exercised in a decade will suddenly start walking 5 miles a day on his lunch break purely out of a primal desire to defeat the marketing department. Friendly competition injects playfulness and urgency into boring routines.
And vitally, you must artificially manufacture dopamine milestones. You celebrate every win.
Don't wait until you lose the full 50 pounds to feel a sense of pride. If you hit your gym target for the week, take yourself to a movie. Buy a new book. You have to train your brain that the process is rewarding, not just the distant finish line. because the ultimate objective of these habit strategies isn't just to be a little healthier or richer. The objective is to survive the initial friction long enough to link these behaviors together and summon the most awe-inspiring, unstoppable force in the universe of human achievement.
Momentum, or as the author affectionately personifies it, Big Mo.
Big Mo. This is the holy grail. This is what separates the elite from the exhausted. The author utilizes a brilliant, visceral analogy here to explain the physics of momentum. He compares starting a new endeavor to pumping water from an antique heavy iron hand pump well.
It perfectly models the psychology of the initial struggle.
You grab the heavy iron handle and you start pumping. It requires massive cardiovascular effort. You are straining your back, you are sweating, your heart is racing. You are putting in 100% maximum effort, and you look at the spout and absolutely nothing is coming out, not a single drop.
And this exact moment, the gap between maximum effort and zero visible results, is the graveyard where 95% of people bury their dreams. They look at the dry spout and declare, "The system is broken, my genetics are bad, the market is rigged."
Exactly. Because they cannot see the reality beneath the surface. Deep underground, with every agonizing pump, the water is slowly and visibly rising up the pipe. If they just keep pumping, ignoring the lack of immediate reward, eventually a tiny trickle of water appears. And if they push through that trickle and keep their rhythm, suddenly the water bursts forth in a massive, rushing stream. And here is the beautiful, unfair advantage of momentum. Once the water is flowing, the physics change. You do not have to maintain that initial agonizing effort. You can just tap the handle with a steady, light, effortless rhythm, and the well will produce an absolute abundance of water.
You have transferred the burden of effort from your muscles to the momentum of the water, but there's a dark side to this physics.
A massive caveat. If you get the water flowing, and then you decide you've earned a break, you let go of the handle and walk away for a week, the heavy water immediately obeys gravity. It drops all the way back down the pipe, deep into the earth. When you return, tapping the handle lightly does absolutely nothing. You have to start the brutal, exhausting, sweat-inducing process all over again. Stopping and starting is the absolute death of momentum.
The neurological equivalent is the myelination of neural pathways. When you build a habit, your brain coats the neural pathway in myelin, making the signal fire faster and with less energy. But if you stop, the pathway degrades. You lose the neurological efficiency. This is why the airplane analogy in the text is so critical.
Imagine you and I are in a race from Los Angeles to New York. You are flying a state-of-the-art jet at 500 miles per hour, blazing fast. But you lack consistency. You decide you are going to land in every single state along the way to rest and sightsee. I am flying a propeller plane at a modest, boring 200 miles per hour, but I never stop. I fly straight through the night. I will absolutely destroy you in that race. Every time you land, you lose time descending, you lose hours on the tarmac, and you burn massive amounts of fuel fighting gravity to take off again. You never achieve cruising altitude. Consistency, even at a slower pace, is what captures and maintains Big Mo.
So the operational question becomes, how do we prevent ourselves from dropping the handle? How do we stay in the air? The answer is the implementation of rigid routines and behavioral rhythms. High achievers do not rely on daily inspiration. They run on a highly optimized autopilot.
The text highlights Jack Nicklaus, arguably the greatest golfer of all time. Before he ever swung a club, he executed a pre-shot routine that was so meticulously locked in. The way he lined up the club face, the exact shifting of his stance, the specific waggle, the internal visualization, that a sports psychologist actually timed it during a major championship. Across the entire high-pressure tournament, Nicklaus's routine never varied by more than 1 single second. Compare that absolute rhythmic control to someone like Greg Norman at the 1996 Masters, who allowed the immense pressure of the moment to speed up his routine, broke his momentum, and suffered one of the most famous collapses in sports history.
Establishing a non-negotiable routine provides a sanctuary of psychological safety. It drastically reduces decision fatigue. If you wake up every morning and have to actively decide whether to work out, what to eat, and what project to start, you are burning through your willpower battery before you even leave the house.
To eliminate that fatigue, the author prescribes the concept of bookending your days. We have to accept reality. You cannot control the chaos of the middle of the day. A client threatens to leave, your kid throws up at school, the server crashes. The messy middle is reactive. But you possess absolute dictatorial control over how your day starts and how it ends.
The rigid bread of the sandwich holding the chaotic meat together.
Let's look at his morning bookend, because it is intense. His alarm goes off at 5 a.m. He hits the snooze button, which gives him exactly 8 minutes. But he doesn't fall back asleep. In those 8 minutes, he executes a specific mental reset. First, he forces his brain to list things he is profoundly grateful for. Second, he does something highly unusual. He mentally sends love to someone. He pictures a person and actively wishes them peace, success, and joy.
Let's pause on that because the neuroscience there is brilliant. By actively wishing someone else well, he is forcibly shutting down the ego and the amygdala's threat detection system. You cannot feel envious, anxious, or threatened while genuinely projecting love. It chemically bathes his brain in oxytocin and reduces early morning cortisol.
It is a preemptive strike against anxiety. Third, he focuses on his number one priority, which for him was his marriage, and visualizes 3 specific actions he can take that day to make his wife feel valued. All of this happens before his feet hit the floor.
He is setting his reticular activating system's filter before the external world has a chance to hijack it.
Exactly. Then he gets up, makes coffee, stretches, spends 30 minutes reading purely positive educational material, and then engages in 1 hour of deep, uninterrupted, focused work. Only after all of that, after he has won the morning, does he have a 7 a.m. calibration appointment to set his most valuable priorities for the day, and finally opens his email to let the world in.
And closing the loop, the evening bookend is just as vital for maintaining the rhythm. He calls it cashing out, much like a waiter meticulously balancing the register at the end of a long shift.
He reviews the tape. How did the day actually go compared to the plan? What priorities didn't get finished and need to be migrated to tomorrow's list? He journals any lingering ideas to get them out of his working memory, and he finishes by reading 10 pages of an inspiring book. Why? Because your subconscious mind stews on whatever you feed it right before sleep. If you watch a true crime documentary or doom scroll the news, your brain processes fear all night. If you read about human triumph, your subconscious processes possibility.
And to ensure these new rhythms don't slowly degrade over time, he utilizes a rhythm register.
It is essentially just a visual tracking sheet, right? A daily checklist for the critical behaviors. Did I drink my water? Did I take my steps? Did I execute the morning routine? Because what gets measured gets managed, and what gets visually tracked gets compounded.
Yes, but the author issues a severe warning here about the mechanics of starting. The most common pitfall is overambition. You cannot adopt the morning routine of a billionaire CEO and a 2-hour-a-day workout regimen if you have spent the last 5 years as a couch potato. Your nervous system will shatter. You must design a rhythm for a lifetime, not a grueling sprint for bikini season. If you cannot realistically envision yourself maintaining the routine 20 years from now, it is too severe. Scale it back until the rhythm feels sustainable.
Okay, so let's assess where we are. We have adopted total responsibility. We are tracking the mosquitoes. We have swapped willpower for the immense engine of why power. We have built our bookend routines, and we have summoned Big Mo. We should be an unstoppable force of nature, right? But here is where Section 6 introduces a terrifying reality. Even with momentum on your side, external friction can slowly, invisibly drain your speed if you do not aggressively, almost ruthlessly curate your surroundings. We are talking about the invisible forces.
These are the subtle, pervasive environmental influences that shape our neurology and our standards without us ever consciously consenting. Input, associations, and environment.
Let's start with input, the old computing adage. Garbage in, garbage out. We touched on this with the morning routine, but the brain's default operating system is rooted in fear and survival.
It's an evolutionary imperative. A prehistoric human who ignored a beautiful sunset survived. A prehistoric human who ignored the rustling in the bushes was eaten by a tiger. Our brains are obsessively wired to scan for threats. Today, we don't have tigers, but we have a 24/7 global news cycle and social media algorithms that are explicitly engineered by psychologists to hijack that exact survival mechanism. The media industry knows that fear, outrage, and tribalism glue our eyes to the screen, so they pump us full of psychological poison. If you start your morning drinking that dirty water, your entire worldview becomes distorted, cynical, and defensive.
The proposed solution is a strict media diet. You have to flush the dirty water out of the glass by constantly pouring clean water in. Books, podcasts, seminars, uplifting content. The author strongly suggests enrolling in Drive Time University. The average commuter spends about 300 hours a year sitting in their car. That is the equivalent of a massive college semester. If you turn off the outrage radio and listen to educational audio, you are essentially acquiring a master's degree in self-improvement using dead time.
It is the ultimate arbitrage of lost time to upgrade your mental software. But input is only the first force. The second, and arguably the most dangerous, is associations. The actual human beings you permit to occupy your time.
This relies on the famous Jim Rohn maxim. You are the exact average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Your income, your physical health, your vocabulary, your attitude toward marriage. They will all inevitably average out to match your peer group. This operates via mirror neurons. If your friends consistently order greasy food, complain about their managers, and mock ambition, the friction of resisting them will eventually wear you down. You will join them. It's like floating in an inner tube in the ocean. You close your eyes, you feel like you were staying perfectly still. But when you look up 20 minutes later, the undercurrent has silently dragged you a mile down the shore.
To combat this insidious drift, the author insists that we must categorize our relationships into 3 distinct groups. First, expanded associations. These are the mentors, the high achievers, the people who intimidate you slightly with their success. You must actively engineer ways to spend more time in their presence to absorb their standards. Second, limited associations. These are perhaps old friends or family members who are fine but lack ambition. You can spend 3 hours at a barbecue with them, but you cannot spend 3 days on a vacation with them, or their complacency will infect you. And finally, the most difficult category, disassociations.
Okay, I have to zero in on disassociations. Telling a listener to look at their friend group and literally cut off the negative people sounds incredibly ruthless. It sounds elitist and cold. How do we balance a fierce drive for personal ambition with basic human loyalty, empathy, and grace? What if a friend isn't toxic, but they were just going through a brutal season of depression or hardship? Do we just abandon them because they lower our average?
That is a profoundly important distinction to make. Supporting a loyal friend through a legitimate crisis, a death, an illness, a job loss, is the definition of empathy and character. That is an investment in human connection. But enduring a chronically toxic individual, someone who constantly plays the victim, who actively tears down your ambitions with cynical remarks, who feeds on drama, and who absolutely refuses to take responsibility for their own growth, that is not empathy. That is self-sabotage.
So where is the line?
The line is defined by the concept that you get exactly what you tolerate. Empathy does not mean setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. If you continually tolerate a toxic environment or a deeply negative peer group, it subtly and permanently rewires your baseline standards. You begin to accept mediocrity, complaining, and failure as normal operating procedures. Protecting your mental space and your momentum is not selfish. It is a vital, non-negotiable boundary. You have to secure your own oxygen mask first. You can only pull others up from a position of unshakable strength. If you allow them to drag you down into the mud out of a misplaced sense of loyalty, neither of you succeeds.
You get exactly what you tolerate. That phrase hits like a freight train, and applies perfectly to the third invisible force, environment. The physical space you occupy.
Yes, the psychology of your physical surroundings.
The author tells a great story about his early days in real estate. He would intentionally drive across the San Francisco Bay to Tiburon, an incredibly affluent, exclusive area, just to slowly drive around and look at the massive, breathtaking estates. He wasn't networking. He didn't know anyone there. He was doing it to systematically expand his internal vision of what was physically possible. He found this one specific, gorgeous blue 4-story house with a unique whale-shaped lightning rod on the roof. He visualized it. He let the environment elevate his internal standards of what he deserved. And years later, through the compound effect of his work, he actually purchased that exact house.
The environment acts as an invisible ceiling on our potential. Think of an oak sapling planted in a small clay pot. It doesn't matter how much sunlight or water you give it or how superior its genetics are. Once the roots hit the boundaries of the pot, they bind and the tree's growth stops. It remains small. But if you take that exact same sapling and plant it in a vast open field, it grows into a 60-foot giant. Your physical and mental environment, the cleanliness of your office, the quality of your clothes, the ambition of your city, dictates your growth capacity. Clear the physical clutter, elevate your aesthetic standards, and your internal reality will rise to meet the new environment.
Okay, so the stage is fully set. We have taken 100% ownership. We have tracked the mosquitoes. We have ignited our why power. We have built unshakable bookend routines. We have Big Mo pushing us, and we have ruthlessly curated our input, our friends, and our physical space. We are cruising at maximum efficiency. But how do we break the sound barrier? How do we hit the turbo button, multiply our results, and truly permanently separate ourselves from the pack?
By fundamentally changing our relationship with pain. This is the ultimate force multiplier. Acceleration and moments of truth.
The text opens this final section with a vivid story about Lance Armstrong. Setting aside his later controversies, the psychological principle he utilized is unassailable. He's competing in the Tour de France, grinding his way up a brutal, incredibly steep mountain pass in the freezing rain and hail. He is not a natural mountain climber. His body is screaming, he is completely exhausted, and he's 32 seconds behind the leader. Every instinct is telling him to conserve energy or quit. But instead of surrendering, he realizes something profound. He realizes that if he is hurting this badly, his competitors must be hurting just as much.
That is the pivotal, paradigm-shifting realization of elite performers. Pain is not a signal to stop. It is a signal of opportunity.
He attacks. He stands up on his pedals and sprints up the mountain in the freezing hail, leaving everyone behind. Because he knew they were at their psychological breaking point, and he decided to push past his. And Muhammad Ali orchestrated the exact same psychological warfare with the rope-a-dope strategy against George Foreman. Ali let Foreman punch himself out, leaning against the ropes for 8 brutal rounds, absorbing the punishment, waiting patiently for Foreman to hit his physical wall of exhaustion. And the moment Foreman emptied his tank, Ali exploded and knocked him out.
It is the deep understanding that true growth and true separation from the competition do not occur in the easy, comfortable moments.
Arnold Schwarzenegger built his entire physique on this principle, the concept of cheat reps. If your workout program calls for a set of 12 bicep curls, the first 12 reps do not build muscle. They merely get you to your baseline limit. The actual physiological muscle growth, the tearing and rebuilding of the fibers, happens exclusively in the 3 to 5 agonizing, form-breaking reps you force yourself to execute after you have hit failure. That is where the multiplier lives.
I love how you relate this to the concept of a physical filter.
Right. I look at hitting the wall. That moment of sheer exhaustion, boredom, or the overwhelming urge to quit like a giant physical filter placed on the road to success. When you hit that wall, your initial reaction is frustration. But the wall isn't there to stop you. The wall is there to stop all the average people. It is a filtration system for mediocrity. When the endeavor gets incredibly hard, you should actually smile, because you have arrived at the exact threshold where 99% of your competition is packing up and going home. If you just take one more step into the pain cave, you are suddenly in a league of your own.
Exactly. The legendary football coach Lou Holtz used to tell his team at halftime, especially when they were losing badly, that everyone gives their best effort on every single play. That is the baseline expectation of merely showing up. What wins championships is the extra agonizing effort exerted after you believe you have already given your best. The second effort, the rep after failure.
And this multiplier effect isn't just about enduring physical pain. It's about systematically doing the unexpected and shattering expectations. This is how you multiply your reputation and your opportunities. The text brings up Oprah Winfrey's legendary 2004 season opener.
The cultural phenomena. Get a car. You get a car.
Exactly. She brought 11 people onto the stage who were in desperate need of transportation and surprised them with brand new Pontiac G6s. That alone was an incredible, highly emotional television moment. It met all expectations of generosity. But then she handed out small gift boxes to all 276 people in the studio audience, claiming one box held the key to a 12th car. But when they opened the boxes on the count of 3, every single person had a set of keys. She went so unimaginably far beyond the expected baseline that it literally became a cultural touchstone that we are still talking about 2 decades later.
And the beauty of the multiplier is that you do not have to be a billionaire television mogul to execute it. The author, to honor his wife's heritage, secretly spent months learning Portuguese just so he could propose to her in her father's native language. Richard Branson drove an actual military tank down Fifth Avenue in New York City just to launch a new cola brand. A young man named Alex, featured in the text, was advised to physically fly across the country and walk into an office for a final job interview instead of taking the easy route of a video call, just to visually demonstrate an undeniable, overwhelming desire for the position. Tragically, Alex chose the comfortable route, stayed home, and lost the job to someone hungrier.
It's the wow moment. What we have to understand mathematically is that going 10% beyond what is expected of you does not yield a linear 10% boost in results. It yields exponential, massively compounded returns in reputation, trust, and opportunity. Why? Because it violently violates the cultural norm of mediocrity. Society expects the bare minimum. We expect the late email, the half-hearted effort, the standard presentation. When you consistently deliver excellence, when you do the unrequired work, you become a unicorn. You become entirely unforgettable.
It accelerates the compound effect at warp speed. You are no longer just adding positive choices to your ledger, you are multiplying your entire trajectory.
Okay, let's pull all of these threads together and bring this deep dive home. What an incredible, challenging journey this has been. We started this hour by looking at the metaphorical X-ray of success, hoping to find a clean, easily visible break, a secret hack or a lottery ticket that explained why some people win and most people lose. But what we discovered is far more demanding and ultimately far more empowering. True transformation is not an overnight miracle. It is the result of ruthlessly swapping the microwave mentality for the mathematical certainty of the compound effect.
It requires the absolute ego death of taking 100% responsibility for every outcome in your life. It means turning on the harsh fluorescent lights of tracking to expose your microscopic unconscious choices and connecting your daily actions to a why power so profound that willpower becomes obsolete.
It means fiercely protecting your hard-won momentum by building unbreakable bookend routines. It means aggressively and unapologetically curating the information, the environment, and the people you allow into your sphere of influence. And finally, it means hitting the turbo button by accelerating your effort precisely at the moment when your brain and body are screaming at you to stop.
It is the ultimate triumph of the tortoise over the hare, consistency over intensity. So, to you, the listener, who has stayed with us through this entire breakdown, here is your immediate call to action to transition this from theory to reality.
We want you to start right now.
Let's start incredibly small. Do not attempt to overhaul your entire existence this afternoon. Pick just one microscopic habit. Pick a mosquito. Something so insignificant, so tiny, that it is incredibly easy to execute and just as easy to ignore. It could be drinking one glass of water the moment you wake up. It could be writing down a single sentence of gratitude before bed. It could be tracking your coffee spending in a tiny notebook. Pick that one small thing and execute it today. Commit to the unbroken chain. Trust the invisible math of the compound effect and let Big Mo eventually take the wheel.
I love that. Hunt down one mosquito today. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over. We have spent this entire deep dive talking about how the compound effect applies to your physical actions, your bank account, your waistline, and your external environment. But I want you to turn the X-ray machine inward. What about your inner monologue? I'm talking about the silent, relentless stream of words you speak to yourself in the privacy of your own head every single minute of every single day. If tiny physical actions compound into massive external realities over 20 years, what are the microscopic things you tell yourself about who you are compounding into?
That is a profoundly haunting question.
If you could print out a transcript of your internal thoughts, if you tracked your self-talk with the exact same ruthless precision that you tracked your spending, would the math show you heading toward emotional bankruptcy or a millionaire's mindset of resilience? Are you quietly compounding your insecurities with every self-deprecating joke? Or are you compounding your strength? The X-ray of the mind might be murky, but remember the absolute rule of this framework. The math never lies and the compound effect never stops. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.